There is a house on the hill above Ashford that no one will talk about directly. They will talk around it. They will lower their voices when the road bends toward it. They will find reasons to take the longer route through town rather than walk the lane that passes beneath its hill. But they will not look at it directly. And they will not say its name without first glancing over their shoulder. The house is called Harrogate. The locals call it something else. They call it the Blue Lantern. Because on certain nights when the moon is full and the sky is gone clear and cold above the Blue Ridge foothills of Virginia, something happens on that hill that no one has ever been able to explain. The cupola at the very top of the house, a small eight-sided dome of cobalt blue glass set into the roof like a jewel pressed into old stone, begins to glow. Not flicker, not catch a passing light. It glows, steady and deep and blue as the heart of a winter flame. A light the color of distance. A light that seems to come from inside the glass itself, from some source that has no right to exist in a house that has been empty for 35 years. The farmers who work the fields at the base of the hill have seen it. The pastor's wife walking home from a late prayer meeting has seen it. The old men who sit on the bench outside the Ashford General Store on warm evenings have seen it more times than they can count, and not one of them has ever been willing to walk up that lane to find out where it comes from. They say the house is cursed. They have been saying it since 1862. They will still be saying it the autumn morning that Willa Ashby walks into Ashford with $15 in her coat pocket and nowhere left to go. She arrives on a Tuesday in the first week of October, when the sugar maples along the road have gone the color of old copper, and the air carries that particular sharpness that comes before the first real cold. She has walked since before dawn from the Caldwell estate 4 miles east of town, where she worked for 4 years as a housemaid, and where 3 days ago she was dismissed without a reference and without an apology. She is 18 years old. She has no family. Her mother, a woman named Grace Ashby, who spent her working life bent over a washboard with red, capable hands and a faith in small mercies, died of lung fever 2 winters past. Her father is a name in a church register that no one alive can connect to a face. There are no cousins, no aunts, no godmothers with spare rooms and warm kitchens. There is only Willa and the road, and the $15 she has saved over 4 years of waking before sunrise and sleeping after everyone else. $15 is not nothing. $15 is 4 years of choosing not to buy a new pair of gloves when the old ones wore through. It is every small want she set aside, every modest comfort she decided she could do without. But $15 in Ashford, Virginia in the year 1897 is not enough to rent a room for more than a month. It is not enough to buy passage to anywhere. It is not enough to begin anything. She walks with her chin level and her eyes forward. She carries her belongings in a canvas bag that hangs from her right shoulder, a change of linen, a pair of woolen stockings, a small tin of needles and thread, a worn prayer book that belonged to her mother, and at the bottom of the bag, wrapped carefully in a scrap of muslin, a silver bracelet. It was her mother's, the only piece of jewelry Grace Ashby ever owned. Willa has never considered selling it. She does not consider it now. But she is aware of its weight in the bag the way a person is always aware of the last thing they have left. The road into Ashford takes her past the churchyard, first a tidy rectangle of old stones behind a low iron fence, the grass still green, the maple leaves beginning to fall across the graves. She does not stop. She has graves of her own to think about without pausing at strangers. The town itself is modest. A main street with a general store, a feed merchant, a blacksmith, a small inn, and a white-painted Baptist church at the far end with a bell tower that leans very slightly to the left. The kind of town that exists all across the Virginia Piedmont, neither prosperous nor failing, simply continuing the way towns do when there is enough land and enough stubbornness to keep them alive. Willa notices the stairs before she has gone 20 feet down the main street. Not hostile stares, something more complicated than that. The stare of people who recognize a stranger and are already forming their judgment before the stranger has said a word. She has been stared at her entire life. She knows how to walk through it. It is the notice board outside the general store that stops her. She has not been looking for it. She does not know it exists. But something the flash of white paper on weathered wood. The particular angle of the morning light makes her turn her head, and once she turns, she cannot look away. It is a legal notice, the kind printed by the county magistrate's office. It is water-stained at the corners and has been tacked up long enough that the edges have begun to curl. The print is small and formal and uses the kind of language that turns simple facts into monuments of obscurity. But the facts, once she has untangled them, are simple enough. For sale by order of the Ashford County Court. The property and grounds known as Harrogate. Legal title absolute. All prior encumbrances discharged. Price by negotiation. Someone has written beneath it in heavy pencil, the letters pressed hard into the paper, price $1 and a fool's nerve. Below that, in different handwriting, smaller and more careful, the blue lantern. God help whoever wants it. Willa reads both editions twice. Then she reads the notice itself again more slowly. She looks up at the hill that rises at the eastern edge of town. She can see it from here if she knows where to look, and she does, because she passed its lane on her way in from the Caldwell estate, and she looked up the hill without understanding what she was looking at. A house. A large house, 3 stories of gray-green fieldstone, with a wide front porch and a row of tall windows that face south. And at the very top, rising above the roofline, the small 8-sided dome of colored glass that she noticed, and then forgot the way you notice, and forget things when you have other concerns. She looks at it now with other eyes. At the bottom of the notice, in smaller type inquiries to Mr. Silas Pruitt, attorney at law. Office above the Ashford Feed and Grain. She picks up her canvas bag and crosses the street. The stairs above the feed merchant are narrow and smell of oats and old paper and the ghost of pipe tobacco that has soaked into the walls over many years. Willa climbs them slowly, not because she is uncertain, but because she is composing herself. She is aware that what she is about to do is not rational. She is aware that $15 is almost certainly not enough. She is aware that the penciled additions to the notice board suggest that what she is about to inquire about is considered by everyone who knows it to be worthless at best and dangerous at worst. She is also aware that she has no other door to walk through. The office of Silas Pruitt, attorney at law, is one room, one window, one desk, one bookcase with more gaps than books, one wood-burning stove that is not yet lit for the season, and 2 chairs, the lawyer's chair behind the desk and a client's chair in front of it. The client's chair, when Willa enters, is occupied. The man sitting in it is large, not tall. He gives no impression of height. Even standing, she will discover, but large in the particular way of men who have spent decades being given everything they wanted and have expanded accordingly. He wears a good broadcloth coat and a gold watch chain, and the expression of a man who regards the entire world as a minor inconvenience arranged for his entertainment. She places him at 60, perhaps older. His face is the color and texture of old saddle leather. His eyes are the pale gray of winter sky and carry in them the specific contempt of someone who has never needed anyone badly enough to conceal his opinion of them. She knows who he is before Silas Pruitt, half rising from behind his desk, with the anxious manner of a man caught between 2 social obligations he cannot reconcile, says the name. Miss, this is Judge Harlan Caldwell. Perhaps you'd care to come back at a Caldwell. Willa says the name quietly, not as a greeting. Caldwell's pale eyes move to her face. Something shifts in them, not quite recognition, but awareness. He has seen her before. She was part of the furniture of his family's estate for 4 years. People like him do not learn the names of the furniture. Sir, Pruitt says with visible discomfort, this is, I'm afraid I don't know your name, miss. Willa Ashby. She sets her canvas bag on the floor and stands straight. Her coat is clean. Her boots are worn but brushed. Her hair is pinned back with a care that costs nothing. I've come about the property. Harrogate. The silence that follows is perhaps 3 seconds long. Then Harlan Caldwell laughs. It is a large laugh, a laugh designed to fill rooms to signal to everyone present that the laughing man is the most important person in the space. He slaps his hand on his knee with a crack that makes Pruitt flinch. His face goes red with it. He laughs until his eyes water, and then he looks at Willa, still standing still, straight, her expression unchanging, and he laughs a little more. "The girl wants the blue lantern," he says to Pruitt as if Willa is not present. "The cursed pile. She wants it." He leans back in the chair, which creaks ominously beneath him. "Well then, what's she offering, Pruitt? What is the going rate for a haunted ruin these days?" $15, Willa says. She says it directly to Pruitt because Pruitt is the one who matters in this room. "It is everything I have." Caldwell makes a sound that is not quite a laugh and not quite a snort, somewhere between the two, a sound of pure, comfortable derision. "Give her the deed, Pruitt. Give her the deed and the rats and whatever's left of the roof. Best entertainment Ashford's had in years." He stands buttoning his coat with the deliberate movements of a man who has all the time in the world. "Though I suspect the house will finish you off before Christmas, girl. It has a way of doing that." He does not look at her again as he leaves. His footsteps on the narrow stair are heavy and unhurried. Willa waits until the sound has faded. Pruitt is quiet for a moment. He is a spare, dry man of about 50 with the look of someone who has spent his career navigating between larger forces and has survived by being useful without being threatening. He polishes his spectacles with a corner of his handkerchief, a habitual gesture she will later learn. He puts them back on and looks at her. She expects pity, or dismissal, or the careful legal version of what Caldwell has just performed. Instead, he says, "The fee for deed recording and conveyance is $20, Miss Ashby." She does not look away. She reaches into her coat and produces the $15 bills and coins, exact counted twice, and places them on the desk. Then she reaches into her canvas bag and unwraps the scrap of muslin and sets her mother's silver bracelet beside the money. "The silver is good," she says. "A silversmith would give $5 for it. With the 15, that is 20. Pruitt looks at the bracelet. He looks at her face. He picks up the bracelet and turns it once in his dry fingers and sets it back down. Then he pushes it gently across the desk toward her. "Keep it," he says. "$15 will cover the recording fee. The judge is right about one thing: the county is keen to have that property off the parish tax rolls. It has been a liability for 35 years. She picks up the bracelet and wraps it back in its muslin without a word. She does not thank him effusively. She does not cry. She simply nods, once the nod of someone completing a transaction that was always going to happen this way, and sits down in the chair that Caldwell has vacated to sign the papers that Pruitt begins to prepare. An hour later, Willa Ashby walks out of the offices of Silas Pruitt, attorney at law, holding a folded deed, the legal owner of Harrogate. The whispers follow her down the main street like weather. She can feel them without hearing them. The twitching of curtain edges, the sudden quiet that falls over a conversation as she passes. She has stopped at the general store to spend 2 of her remaining dollars, a small loaf of bread, a candle, a box of matches, a paper of salt, and the woman behind the counter serves her with the careful neutrality of someone who already knows exactly who she is and what she has just done, and is reserving full judgment until the situation becomes clearer. Willa accepts her change and her purchases and turns to go. She almost walks into Dorothea Horn. The old woman is standing in the doorway of the store as if she has always been there, as if she grew out of the floorboards sometime in the previous century, and no one has managed to remove her since. She is small and very thin and very old, 88. Willa will later learn, though she carries her age not as a weight, but as an authority, the way certain people carry the sum of everything they have survived. She wears a black wool shawl regardless of the season, winter or summer, and her eyes are dark and clear and see considerably more than most people's eyes see. The other people in the store find reasons to become very interested in things in the opposite direction. Willa stops. The old woman reaches out and takes hold of Willa's arm. Her grip is stronger than it has any right to be. It is the grip of someone who intends to be heard and will not release until she is sure the words have landed where they were aimed. "They say it's cursed," Dorothea Horn says. Her voice is low and raspy and carries the particular resonance of a voice that has been saying true things for a very long time. 35 years they've been saying it. That house on the hill, the woman who lived there, her sorrow, her ruin. Her grip tightened slightly. You listen to me, child. Stones don't hold curses. Men make curses. Men make them out of fear and greed and the need to keep other people from looking too closely at what they've done. She pauses. Her dark eyes hold Willa's gray ones without blinking. Stones hold something else entirely. Stones hold promises. You go up to that house, you listen to the stones, and when the stones speak, you mind you hear them right. She releases Willa's arm. She turns and walks back out through the doorway down the steps and across the street toward the churchyard, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is going and has been going there for a very long time. Willa stands in the doorway of the general store and watches her until she has passed through the churchyard gate and disappeared among the old stones. She files the words away the way she files everything she does not yet understand carefully in a place where she can find them again. Then she picks up her canvas bag and her parcel of supplies and starts toward the hill. She does not get 50 yards before she hears the carriage. It comes fast around the bend from the direction of the Caldwell estate, faster than the road deserves, faster than any reasonable person would drive through a town. The two horses are gray and matched and very fine. The carriage is lacquered black with brass fittings that catch the October sun. It is the kind of carriage that announces before a word is spoken that its occupant has never had to consider what other people on the road might prefer. She steps to the side of the road. It is not far enough. Whether it is deliberate, and she will spend a long time afterward deciding whether it was deliberate, the right wheel of the carriage passes through the wide, muddy puddle at the roadside with a velocity that sends a wave of brown water across the lower half of Willa's coat and dress and up onto her hands and face. The carriage does not slow, but the window drops and Harlan Caldwell's face appears in it, and he looks back at her with an expression that is not exactly cruelty. Cruelty implies that the other person matters enough to require an effort. This is something easier and more absolute than cruelty. This is the expression of a man who does not see a person standing in the road, who sees at most an obstacle that he has passed. A fitting welcome to your grand estate, Miss Ashby, he calls back, and his voice carries the particular pleasure of a man who finds his own remarks amusing. Mind the ghosts don't trouble your sleep. The carriage rounds the bend and is gone. Willa does not wipe her face immediately. She stands in the road, mud-spattered, watching the place where the carriage disappeared, and she feels the cold water seeping through her coat. She feels the weight of the canvas bag on her shoulder. She feels the folded deed inside her coat pressed against her ribs. She feels something else too, something that begins in the place where humiliation and despair would normally take root, but finds no purchase there, because those feelings require a certain kind of hope that has not yet been disappointed, and Willa Ashby has not carried that kind of hope for a very long time. What takes root instead is simpler and older and considerably more durable. It is a vow. She will not be unmade by this. Not by the mud, not by the laughter, not by the man in the carriage who cannot see her. She will not be unmade by the house on the hill, whatever it contains. She has nothing left to lose, and people with nothing left to lose are in certain important ways the most dangerous people in the world. She wipes her face with the back of her hand. She turns toward the hill. She begins to walk. The lane to Harrogate is not so much a road as a memory of one. 35 years of neglect have allowed the vegetation on either side to reclaim much of its width. Blackberry canes reach across from the right. A stand of young sumac has established itself across the middle of the path where the old gravel has washed away to bare clay. The ruts from wagon wheels, the last wagon wheels to use this lane 3.5 decades ago, have filled with leaf litter and moss. She walks it slowly, noting the state of the stone wall that runs along the left side. Some sections are still standing. Many have fallen. The stones themselves are a good field stone pulled from the Blue Ridge soil, the kind of stone that does not crumble, only falls when the mortar between it fails. She notes this the way she notes everything practically without sentiment, cataloging what is broken and what might still be sound. The gates at the end of the lane are iron or were. They are rust now more than iron, and they are bound with a chain and padlock that have also rusted into a single unit of brownish orange that no key would fit. She does not attempt them. She finds the gap in the wall 20 feet to the right, where three courses of stone have collapsed, and steps through it into the grounds. She stops. She had seen the house from the road. She thought she knew what she was approaching. But there is a difference between seeing a thing from a distance and standing before it, and the difference with Harrogate is considerable. The house is large, not grand, or rather it was grand once in a way that time and neglect have not entirely effaced, but have certainly altered. 3 stories of Appalachian fieldstone, the kind of blue-gray green that is particular to the Piedmont geology quarried and laid in the federal style that was fashionable when the house was built in 1831. Wide front steps of the same stone worn smooth in the center from 60 years of foot traffic before the foot traffic stopped. A porch with 4 square columns, the paint long gone, the wood beneath gray and checked, but structurally she suspects still sound. Tall 12/12 windows across the front, most of them still intact, the glass darkened with 35 years of grime. And above it all, above the roofline, the cupola. Up close, it is more remarkable than she expected. 8 sides each fitted with a panel of cobalt blue glass of a quality she has never seen, thick and slightly irregular, the way old glass is full of the small bubbles and waviness that means it was made by hand. The lead between the panels is green with age but holding. Every pane is intact. In a house where time has damaged nearly everything, this small dome of colored glass has survived without a crack. She stares at it for a long moment. Then she goes to the front door. It is oak massive, the wood gray and dry but solid. The iron hardware is rusted. The lock is seized. She does not have a key. There was no key, Pruitt had said apologetically, the original having been lost decades ago, and so she puts her shoulder to the door and pushes. Nothing. She adjusts her angle, digs her boots into the stone of the porch, and pushes again harder, her breath coming sharp with the effort. The door moves, not much, half an inch perhaps, before something catches. But half an inch is enough. She works at it, push, hold, push again, finding the rhythm of the reluctance. And with a sound like a very old argument being finally resolved, the door scrapes inward far enough for her to turn sideways and pass through. The air that meets her is cold and still, and has the particular density of air that has been sealed away from the world for a long time. It carries within it the smell of decades' dust and damp stone, and the faint ghost of wood smoke from fires that have not burned in 35 years. And beneath all of that, something she cannot immediately name. Something dry and papery and faintly chemical, like a library or a doctor's surgery. The smell of knowledge preserved in still air. She stands in the entrance hall and lets her eyes adjust. The hall is high-ceilinged with a plaster medallion above where the chandelier once hung. The chandelier itself is gone, the chain that held it dangling bare. A staircase rises from the right side of the hall, its banister still elegant in its lines, though cobwebbed beyond description. Every piece of furniture that was left behind, and there is a great deal of it, sheeted in white linen, that is gone. The yellow-gray of old teeth stands motionless in the gray light. A congregation of covered shapes, as if someone had thrown a sheet over a household and walked away. Which is, she will come to understand approximately what happened. The silence is absolute. She is aware of her own breathing. She is aware of the sound her boot makes on the dusty floor when she takes a step, a sound that seems much too loud for a room this size, as if the house is listening to every footfall and cataloging it, deciding what to make of this new presence. She crosses the hall and stands in the doorway of the room to the left. The library. It is smaller than the hall, but only comparatively. It is still a substantial room running the full depth of the house with bookshelves from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. Most of them are empty. Some hold a scattering of volumes, their spines faded beyond reading. There are 2 windows on the south wall, both intact, both so thoroughly filmed with grime that the light coming through them has a greenish underwater quality. In the center of the room, a large reading table. 2 wing chairs near the cold fireplace. and the fireplace itself a handsome thing carved from a single piece of dark gray limestone with a deep firebox and a wide mantel above. She notices the draft immediately. It is subtle enough that she might have missed it if she had not been paying a different kind of attention. A current of air, cool and steady, moving across the back of her hand as she holds it up in the near-still interior of the room. Not from the window she checks, and the windows are sealed tight, the glazing putty hard and complete. Not from the door behind her, which she has left open. The current seems to originate from the interior wall, the wall that houses the fireplace. She walks to it. She puts her hand flat against the limestone of the chimney breast, just to the right of the firebox opening. The stone is cold and slightly damp, as old stone always is in October. She moves her hand to the left. Same. She crouches and holds her hand an inch from the wall at knee level. There. A definite, steady movement of air, not a whisper of breath, coming from inside a wall that has no business breathing. She straightens. She looks at the fireplace. She looks at the mantel above it, and she sees the bird. It is small, no longer than her thumb from beak to tail, carved from the limestone of the mantel itself, not attached but part of it, as if the original stonemason had paused in his work and, seized by some private impulse, taken his smallest chisel and rendered in the gray stone a wren. Its head is turned slightly, its eye a polished circle of darker stone. The carving is exquisitely detailed. She can see each wing feather individually suggested the curve of the breast, the cocked angle of the tail. It is alive with the skill that made it, even as everything around it has grown dull and still with age. It is also perfectly clean. In a room where 35 years of dust has settled on every surface, like a second skin, the carved wren on the mantel is free of it. As if someone with small, careful hands has been tending this one detail, and nothing else, returning to this one spot in the abandoned house to keep it visible, to make sure it could still be found and read. Willa stares at it for a long time. She does not know what it means. She does not know why one small carved bird should be spotless when the rest of the house is smothered. She does not know why the wall beside the fireplace should breathe. She does not know what the faint, dry smell in the air is, the one that seems slightly stronger near the chimney breast than it does in the rest of the room. But the questions settle into her like seeds into ground. Something is here, something that has been waiting for 35 years to be found. She is certain of it, the way she is sometimes certain of things that she cannot yet prove, with a quiet bedrock certainty that does not require justification and does not announce itself. She forces herself to stop. She is exhausted and muddy and hungry, and the sun will be down in 2 hours. There are more immediate concerns than mysteries she cannot yet solve. She explores the rest of the house methodically, room by room, floor by floor. What she finds is a catalog of managed damage. The east wing is driest, the plaster cracked but holding the windows intact. The west wing lies. It presents a reasonable face wall, standing ceiling overhead, but the smell gives it away, that particular sweetness of wood that has been wet too many times and has begun its slow negotiation with rot. The kitchens are intact, though filthy. The upper floors are cold and drafty, but structurally sound in most rooms. She finds in the back kitchen a fireplace that is functional and a small stack of dry wood that some previous visitor, an animal prober, a trespasser, she cannot say has left. She finds an old broom handle with enough bristles left to be useful. She finds a copper pot with a small hole in the side that she can cover with a folded rag. She finds in the walled kitchen garden behind the house the gray skeleton of what was once a productive garden, the formal beds still visible beneath the weeds, the paths still traceable, and at the far wall a stone well with a wooden cover that she lifts carefully and peers into. She drops a pebble. She hears it hit water not too far down. The well is good. She has water. She has a fireplace. She has her bread and her candle and her matches. She has a house. She goes back to the kitchen, sweeps a space clear, lays her blanket, and starts a fire with her careful hands. The wood catches slowly at first, then with more confidence, and the light it throws against the stone walls is warmer than she has any right to expect on a night this cold in a house this abandoned. She is sitting beside it, sharing the last of the day's bread between herself and the silence, when something moves in the shadows by the kitchen door. She does not startle. She has learned over 18 years that startling rarely helps. The cat that steps into the firelight is black, entirely black without a single light or hair as far as she can see. It is thin in the way of an animal that has been surviving rather than living, its coat flat, rather than full, its ribs visible when it moves. But its eyes, when the firelight catches them, are extraordinary. A deep, particular shade of green that seems to collect light and hold it rather than simply reflect it. It moves with the liquid, silent precision that cats never lose regardless of circumstance. It stops 6 feet from her. It regards her with an expression of careful assessment. It does not hiss. It does not flee. It simply considers her as if she is a problem it is working through from first principles. She breaks off a piece of bread, a larger piece than she should give, given her supplies, but the decision is made before she can interrogate it and sets it on the flagstone floor between them. The cat looks at the bread, looks at her, looks at the bread again. Then it steps forward with the dignity of an animal accepting what was always due to it and begins to eat. Cole, Willa says quietly, naming the color of him, naming the thing she sees. The cat does not look up from the bread, but its ears move slightly. An acknowledgement, a registration of the words stored alongside everything else it has already decided about her. She banks the fire and wraps herself in her blanket, and Cole curls at the foot of her makeshift bed with the settled air of an animal that has made its decision and is done with the matter. He is warm where his body touches the blanket through the fabric, a small, concentrated point of warmth in the large, cold kitchen. Willa lies in the dark and listens to her house, the tick of cooling stone, the sigh of wind through gaps she will need to find and seal, the creak of old wood somewhere in the walls contracting with the night cold. Somewhere distant, the soft complaint of a branch against a window. She thinks about the draft in the library. She thinks about the wren on the mantel. She thinks about Dorothea Horn saying stones hold promises with the gravity of someone delivering the most important sentence of the conversation and then walking away before Willa could ask what it meant. The old woman had known something, had been waiting to say it to the right person, and she had said it, and then she had left, and the words had settled in Willa's chest like something she had always known and only just remembered. She closes her eyes. And somewhere in the half place between waking and sleep, she hears it or imagines she hears it. She will never be entirely certain which a sound from the direction of the library. Faint and brief and unmistakable. The sound of knuckles rapping very gently against a hollow wall. She opens her eyes. Cole has lifted his head. He is looking toward the hallway, his green eyes wide and very still in the dark, his pupils enormous in the firelight's recession. She listens. The house is silent. But the house is not, she is now certain, empty. Not in the way anyone might fear. Not with anything living that does not belong there. Empty of people, yes, 35 years, empty of people. But full, she thinks, full to the seams with something else. Something that has been here all along, patient behind its wall of stone and sealed brick, waiting with the absolute patience of something that has nowhere else to go and every reason to stay. For what? For someone with nothing left to lose. For someone who would buy a ruin for $15 and mean it. For someone who would name a half-starved cat and share her last bread with it without a second thought. She pulls her blanket tighter. Tomorrow she will work. Tomorrow she will begin to listen to the stones. The first week teaches her the grammar of the house. Every old house has one, a private language of creaks and drafts and settling sounds, a syntax of which floors are solid and which give, which windows seal and which breathe, where the water goes when it rains and where it should have gone but doesn't. Willa learns Harrogate's grammar the way she learned everything useful in her life, by paying attention and keeping her mouth shut and letting the thing itself tell her what it needs. The east wing is the most honest part of the house. The floors are dry, the plaster cracked, but holding the windows intact. The west wing lies. It presents a reasonable face wall, standing ceiling overhead, but the smell gives it away, that particular sweetness of wood that has been wet too many times and has begun its slow negotiation with rot. She does not work the west wing yet. She files it away as a problem for a different season and turns her attention to what can be addressed now. She clears the kitchen first. 3 days of work hauling debris, scrubbing stone, clearing the flue of the kitchen fireplace with a length of iron rod she finds in the stable yard. When she lights the first real fire in the kitchen hearth, she stands back and watches the smoke go straight up and does not move for a full minute. It is a small victory. She counts it anyway. The kitchen garden comes next. She is not expecting much. 35 years of neglect has a way of erasing things, but the garden surprises her. Beneath the dead canes and the shoulder-high weeds and the decades of leaf fall, the soil is dark and loose and smells of iron the way good soil does. The old beds are still there, their stone borders intact. And growing along the south wall in the shelter of the old brick, she finds things she did not plant and did not expect: wild garlic gone half feral, but still productive, its leaves narrow and sharp-scented in the October cold. A clump of sage so woody it has become a small shrub, still gray-green, still fragrant when she breaks a leaf. Nettle along the north wall, which makes a passable soup when she boils it with salt and the garlic. It is not good food, but it is food, and she is learning to take the distinction seriously. She is learning the garden's grammar too. What has chosen to survive here, and why and where, and what that tells her about the soil and the drainage and the hours of sun. Cole supervises all of this from whatever elevated surface is nearest. He has established a clear hierarchy of preferred positions: the kitchen windowsill. When the fire is burning the top of the stone garden wall in the afternoons, when the weak October sun makes it warm, and at night, without negotiation or discussion, the foot of Willa's blanket. He is not an affectionate cat. He does not ask to be petted. But he is consistent, and consistency in Willa's experience is worth more than affection. He also does something that she notices but cannot yet explain. Every day without fail, he sits in the library. Not anywhere in the library, specifically always in the same place. On the hearth, pressed against the chimney breast, his green eyes fixed on the wall to the left of the firebox. He can sit there for hours, still as carved stone himself, watching the wall with the absolute patience of an animal that knows something is there and is simply waiting for the right moment to prove it. She watches him watching the wall. She thinks about the draft. She thinks about the wren. It is the third week of October when she finds the hollow sound. She has been scrubbing the inside of the firebox, a grim task: 35 years of old ash and bird debris, and the accumulated grime of a flue that has not been properly cleaned since before the war, when her brush catches the back wall of the firebox and produces a sound that is wrong. She stops. She knocks with her knuckle, then with her fist. The sound is not the dense, flat resistance of solid stone. It is lighter, rounder. It has an interior, a space behind it, answering the knock with a faint hollow resonance that she feels as much as she hears. The sound of a cavity, the sound of something sealed away. She sits back on her heels and stares at the back of the firebox. The brick is not original. She can see that now that she is looking for it. The color is slightly different, a shade lighter than the limestone of the chimney breast, and the mortar between the bricks has a grayness that is not the same gray as the ancient mortar holding the rest of the house together. Someone laid these bricks deliberately. Someone who knew what was behind them and chose to seal it away. This is not a structural repair. This is an act of concealment carried out with care and intention by hands that understood exactly what they were doing and why. She goes to the stable yard and finds the iron pry bar under a pile of rotted harness leather. It is heavy and straight and solid in her hands, the kind of tool built to outlast the hands that use it. She returns to the library. She wedges the tip of the pry bar into the mortar seam at the edge of the first brick and leans her full weight onto it. For a long moment, nothing moves except her. Then the mortar cracks a sharp, intimate sound in the quiet room, and the brick shifts a quarter inch. She works it free, sets it on the hearth beside her. A thin blade of air escapes from the opening, cold and dry and carrying within it that smell she has noticed since the first day, papery chemical, faintly sweet. She knows the smell now, having lived with it for 3 weeks, having had it strengthen near the fireplace and weaken as she moved away. It is the smell of old ink, of paper preserved in dry, still air, of a room that has been sealed against time and has succeeded. She works faster, brick by brick, the pile growing on the hearthstone, the opening growing larger, the smell strengthening with each brick removed. Her arms burn, her hands are raw from the iron. She does not stop. When the opening is large enough to pass through, she sits back and catches her breath. Her chest heaves, her hands are shaking, though not from cold. Cole is beside her. He has not made a sound throughout this entire process, but he is pressed against her knee now, and she can feel the faint vibration of a sound that is not quite a purr, lower than that, more questioning, as if he too is uncertain what they are about to find. She lights her candle. She crouches low and pushes herself through the opening. The room on the other side is small, no larger than a generous closet, perhaps 8 feet by 10, but it is not a closet. It is a study. A complete, deliberate, fully furnished study sealed into the interior of the chimney breast like a letter placed inside a wall. The air is cold and perfectly dry. The dryness is the first remarkable thing, not the dry dusty of rooms long unclean, but the dry still of a space that has been somehow protected from the humidity that has worked its damage throughout the rest of Harrogate. She is standing inside the chimney mast, she realizes. The brick and stone surrounding her on 3 sides has acted for 35 years as insulation, keeping the cold out in summer, the damp out, always creating a microclimate of preservation inside a house, otherwise subject to the full indignity of neglect. Whoever sealed this room understood exactly what they were doing. The ceiling was not concealment only, it was protection. Shelves line 2 walls. They hold books, not many, perhaps 24, and beside the books on the lower shelves, a row of glass jars sealed with wax, each containing plant material, dried leaves, seeds, small bundles of root. Each jar has a paper label, the handwriting on it precise and small, and still entirely legible after 35 years in the dry dark. She reads several labels without touching the jars: bergamot dried, spice bush bark, black cohosh root harvested September 1860, boneset flowering tops. The handwriting is the handwriting of someone for whom precision is a habit and accuracy is a moral position. In the center of the room, a narrow oak desk, a straight-back chair tucked beneath it, with the neatness of someone who expected to return. On the desk, a pen in its holder, the nib gone dry and dark. A small glass inkwell, empty, but for a dark residue. A magnifying glass with a brass handle, its lens still clear. And placed at the exact center of the desk, as if arranged for someone's finding, as if placed there by hands that understood it would eventually be found, and wanted it to be the first thing seen, a large leather-bound journal. Willa stands very still. The candlelight moves across the room in slow, uncertain waves, and in each wave she sees a little more the detail of the labels on the jars, the careful organization of the shelves, the precise placement of objects on the desk. This was not a room abandoned in haste. Every object in it is where it was deliberately put. This is a room left in order by someone who was not sure they would be back, but wanted their work to be findable. Wanted it to survive whatever came next. She sits in the straight-back chair. She sets the candle on the desk. She opens the journal. The handwriting inside is not what she expected. She had imagined a diary, personal, discursive, the kind of writing that turns inward and follows the weather of a private self. What she finds instead is the handwriting of a scientist. Columns of observations, dates beginning in 1840 and running page after page through 1861. Sketches of plants rendered with botanical precision, root systems, in cross-section, leaf, venation, seed structure. The relationship of one plant part to another, drawn out in careful explanatory lines. Beside each drawing, dense paragraphs of notes in that same small, precise hand. The notation system is consistent across 2 decades abbreviations that repeat and develop shorthand that she begins to decode as she reads the private language of a mind that has been working on the same problem for a very long time. She turns to the front of the journal. Inside the cover, written larger than the rest, as if the writer understood this was the thing that needed to be found first. The work and observations of Dr. Adeline Voss, physician. Harrogate, Ashford County, Virginia. Begun 1840. This record is the whole of 22 years of clinical practice and botanical research. It is left here in trust for whoever has the patience and the will to find it. May it be used for the good it was always meant for. Willa reads it twice. Then she reads the date again, begun 1840, which means that Adeline Voss was working in this room, in this sealed hidden room, or in the library outside it for 22 years before whatever happened in 1862 ended it. 22 years of this handwriting, this precision, this relentless accumulation of evidence. She turns pages carefully, the paper dry and firm beneath her fingers, the ink faded from black to a warm brown but entirely readable. She reads slowly, piecing together the work from the observations following the development of a scientific argument across the years. The structure of the journal reveals itself gradually, early pages exploratory, the handwriting slightly less certain, the observations more tentative. Middle pages dense with accumulated evidence, the writing faster, the mind behind it clearly in a state of growing confidence. Later pages carrying the particular economy of someone who has proved what they set out to prove and is now documenting it with the care of someone who understands that the documentation is as important as the discovery. The plants Adeline Voss spent 22 years studying are not exotic. They grow throughout the Appalachian Piedmont in the woodlands and creek banks and disturbed roadsides of Virginia wild bergamot, spicebush, black cohosh, boneset, plants that the farm women of the region have used in their kitchens and their sick rooms for generations, passing the knowledge from mother to daughter in an informal chain of practical understanding that has never been written down, never been measured, never been tested against anything more rigorous than individual memory and accumulated habit. What Adeline Voss did was different from that tradition, though she built upon it. She measured, she recorded, she tested not in the abstract, but in the particular case by case, patient by patient, over years of careful observation. She documented what she administered and in what quantities and to whom and what happened afterward. She tracked failures as meticulously as successes. She revised her formulations based on outcomes and documented the revisions and tested those and documented those outcomes too. She was doing something that had no name yet in the medical literature of her time, something that would not have a name for another 50 years. She was conducting a clinical trial alone in a house on a Virginia hill across 2 decades with the plants that grew in the hedgerows outside her door. And what she was testing for, what the 22 years of meticulous work was aimed at, becomes clear in the later pages of the journal. Lung fever. The disease that moves through a community like weather that takes the young and the old with indiscriminate efficiency that fills the churchyards of small Virginia towns with stones bearing dates too close together. The disease that is everywhere in the Piedmont in the damp winters and the close quarters of farm families and the lungs of people who work long hours in cold air. The disease that the county physicians treat with rest and warm broths and prayer because they have nothing else to offer, nothing that reliably works, nothing that touches the course of the illness and the patients who are taken worse by it. The disease that took Willa's mother 2 winters past. She stops reading. She sits for a moment in the dry, cold dark of the hidden room, the candle flame the only movement in the stillness, and she is aware of something happening in her chest that she does not have a precise name for. It is not grief she has been through. Grief has learned its exact dimensions, and its slow recession knows where its edges are. This is different. This is the feeling of two separate facts held at a distance for a long time, suddenly coming into contact with each other and producing in the collision something new. Something that is not grief and is not anger and is not hope exactly. Something that is all three at once compressed into a single point of sensation behind her sternum. Her mother coughed for 3 years before the end. She grew thinner and then thinner than that. She died in February in a rented room above a laundry in a town 15 miles from here, with Willa holding her hand and a doctor within the family's means nowhere to be found. The landlord had been kind enough to let them stay. That was the most that kindness could offer. And this woman, this Dr. Adeline Voss, who lived on this hill above this town 35 years ago, spent 22 years trying to find a way to stop exactly that from happening. Spent 22 years measuring and recording and testing and revising alone in a sealed room, working toward a treatment that she would never be allowed to share. Willa turns back to the journal. She reads until the candle burns low, then retrieves the second one from her bag and lights it from the first. She reads through the botanical records, through the clinical observations, through the careful documentation of what worked and what did not and why. She reads the case notes for 34 patients treated over 8 years with Adeline's botanical protocol. She reads the outcome documentation, which is more careful and more honest than anything she has encountered in the formal medical writing she has seen. Because Adeline did not suppress her failures, she recorded them with the same precision she brought to her successes and attempted to understand them. She reads until her eyes ache and the second candle is guttering and the cold in the room has settled into her bones in a way that will take the better part of the following day to drive out. Then in the last section of the journal, the pages closest to the back, the handwriting slightly more compressed, as if the writer was aware of running out of space, she finds a letter. It is not finished. It is a draft crossed out in places, rewritten above the crossings, out the record of a person trying to find exactly the right words for something important. It is addressed to Judge Aldous Caldwell, Harlan Caldwell's father, the previous generation of the same name, wearing the same county title. She reads it slowly. Dear Judge Caldwell, I have received your offer regarding the purchase of my research and the exclusive rights to any treatments arising from it, and I am grateful for the interest you have shown in the work. However, I must respectfully and firmly decline. The work contained in these records was not undertaken for private profit, and it cannot in good conscience be transferred for that purpose. The people of Ashford County who suffer from lung fever are not a commercial opportunity. They are our neighbors. This treatment, when it is ready to be shared, and it is nearly ready, will be shared without cost in the public record available to every physician and every family who needs it. It belongs to no one exclusively. It belongs to everyone who is suffering. I remain respectfully, Dr. Adeline Voss, November 14th, 1861. Below the draft in different ink, added later, the pen pressed harder, as if the handwriting it needed the resistance of the page 3 lines, that are not a letter and not a note, but something closer to a declaration. He has sent his man again. Third time this month. The answer remains the same. I will not sell what belongs to everyone to enrich one family. Whatever he does next, the record will survive. I have seen to it. Willa sets the letter down on the desk. She sits in the candlelight and lets the pieces arrange themselves into the shape they were always going to make, because the shape was always there. She is simply the first person in 35 years to be in a position to see it. Adeline Voss refused to sell. 6 weeks after this draft was written, sometime in early 1862, Adeline Voss died. A fall down the main staircase of this house. The kind of accident that happens to people who live alone. The kind of accident that is not witnessed and leaves no evidence that contradicts the official account. After her death, the house was sealed. And then shortly after, systematically, with the patience of people who understand that the most effective way to keep people away from something is not to guard it, but to terrify them, the stories began. The curse, the haunting, the tragedy no one could name aloud. A cage of whispers built around a room of knowledge, constructed carefully by people who needed that room to remain unfound until they could find it themselves on their own terms for their own purposes. And the Caldwell family has owned Ashford County ever since generation to generation. The old judge passing his title in his methods, in his unfinished business, to the son who carries them now into a new century, into the year 1897, when a girl with $15 and a deed in her coat pocket walked through his story without knowing she was in it. The house is not cursed. The house was imprisoned. And Willa Ashby, 18 years old, sole owner of the deed to Harrogate, sitting in a hidden room with a dead woman's life work in her lap and a second guttering candle and a black cat watching from the doorway, is the first person in 35 years to understand why. She does not tell anyone. Not yet. The instinct is not cunning. It is older than cunning, more basic. She does not tell anyone because she does not yet know who can be trusted with this. And she has learned in 18 years of having nothing that the moment you show someone what you have is the moment they begin calculating how to take it. She wraps the journal in the muslin that had held her mother's bracelet, using the larger piece of oilcloth she found in the stable to create a waterproof layer over that. She wraps each glass jar in cloth and moves them one by one to the highest and driest shelf of the kitchen larder. She leaves the hidden room otherwise as she found it, and she patches the opening in the firebox with loose bricks. Not mortared, she needs to be able to get back in, but stacked carefully enough to look at a casual glance, like ordinary fireplace damage. She does all of this quietly and thoroughly, and then she goes back to work. Because the work does not stop. The work is the only thing in those weeks that keeps her from being overwhelmed by the size of what she has found. The work is specific and physical and present in a way that the journal's implications are not. She can measure the work. She can see its results. She cannot yet see how to act on what she has discovered, and so she keeps her hands busy and her mind moving through the problem the way she moves through the house methodically from room to room, addressing what can be addressed and noting what cannot. By the 1st of November, she has made the library livable, the kitchen functional, and 2 rooms on the second floor dry enough to use. She has sealed the worst gaps in the east wing windows with strips of cloth and a pot of linseed oil she found in the stable. She has cleared the kitchen garden and turned the soil in the raised beds, preparing them for early spring planting. She has mapped the roof from the outside, walking the perimeter, noting where the slates are missing or cracked, and made a list of what would need to happen before the worst of winter came. She cannot afford any of it. She has $3 left. $3 cannot buy slates, and it cannot buy mortar, and it cannot pay a carpenter. She knows this. She adds it to the list of things she knows and cannot yet solve and keeps moving. She has also in the evenings been going back to the hidden room and reading more of the journal, working through it section by section with the care of someone who understands that what they are reading is not just important, but urgent. She takes notes on a piece of brown paper salvaged from her supply purchases, tracking the clinical cases, mapping the botanical protocol, trying to understand not just what Adeline discovered, but how she discovered it and how it could be replicated by someone with proper training. The answer, the more she reads, is clear, and growing clearer, the work is nearly complete. The clinical records show 34 cases of lung fever treated with Adeline's botanical protocol over 8 years with detailed outcome documentation. The botanical preparation notes are precise enough that a trained physician could replicate them. The theoretical framework connecting the treatment to its mechanism is there in the later pages, written with the confidence of someone who has tested an idea long enough to trust it. This is not a fragment. This is a finished thing. It is a gift wrapped in brick, waiting for someone to open it. It is the 3rd week of November when Judge Harlan Caldwell comes to call. She is in the kitchen garden when she sees him coming up the lane. He does not come alone. He has a man with him, large and deliberate in his movements, with the careful watchfulness of someone paid to be watchful. Deputy Crane. She has seen him in town, always near the judge, always with that same expression of managed neutrality that is itself a kind of threat. She sets down her spade. She does not go inside. She waits. Caldwell stops at this gate to the kitchen garden and looks at her over the stone wall. He looks at the garden, the cleared beds, the turned soil, the repaired gate, the general evidence of a person who has been working steadily and well, and something moves through his expression that she cannot read immediately. It is not surprise exactly. It is something more calculating than surprise, a reassessment of something he had already assessed. Miss Ashby, he says, his tone is the tone of a man paying a social call, pleasant and light, and entirely disconnected from the reality of who he is and who she is and what stands between them. I see you've been busy. I have, she says. He looks at the house. His eyes move to the cupola, linger there for a moment longer than politeness requires, and then come back to her. I'll get directly to the point since you seem like a direct young woman. He reaches into his coat and produces a folded paper, which he holds up briefly before tucking it back. I'm prepared to offer you $300 for Harrogate. Lock, stock, and deed. That is, I suspect you'll agree a considerable return on your investment. She looks at him steadily. She does not look at the paper. She does not look at Deputy Crane. She looks at Caldwell's face, at the pale winter eyes that are watching her with the patience of a man who expects ultimately to get what he wants because he always has, because the county has always arranged itself to ensure that he does. $300 is more money than she has ever seen in one place. $300 could begin, a life could buy passage somewhere, could build something from nothing. She is aware of all of this in the same moment that she is aware of what she knows, and he does not know she knows, and that awareness is the most important thing in the conversation. No, she says. The pleasantness in his expression cools slightly. Not disappears, he has too much practice for that, but cools the way a room cools when a door opens on a winter day. That is a generous offer, Miss Ashby. I would encourage you to consider it carefully. I have considered it. You cannot afford to maintain this property. You cannot afford the repairs it requires. You are, if you'll pardon the plain speaking, a young woman alone, with no resources and no connections, trying to hold up a house that has been falling down for 35 years. He says this without cruelty, which is almost worse than cruelty. He says it with the flat delivery of someone reciting facts that the listener will eventually have to accept. I am offering you a way out of a situation that will otherwise break you. I appreciate your concern, Willa says. She picks up her spade. He looks at the spade. He looks at her face. He looks at the house again, and this time when he looks at it, the calculation in his expression is clearer. She can see him working through something, adding and subtracting, arriving at a number that he is not going to share with her. You'll think about it, he says. It is not quite a question. Good day, Judge Caldwell, she says. He holds her gaze for a moment longer than is comfortable. Then he turns and walks back down the lane. Deputy Crane falling into step behind him, and Willa stands in the kitchen garden with her spade in her hands and watches them until the lane bends and they are gone from sight. She is still standing there when the coal begins to seep through her coat and she makes herself move. That evening, she goes to the hidden room and reads until the lamp runs low. She is thinking about the look on Caldwell's face when he glanced at the cupola, the fraction of a second too long. The thing he was looking for that he did not find or found but could not interpret. He knows the property contains something. He has known it for years, decades perhaps. This is what the curse story was always for. Not just to devalue the property and keep strangers away, but to keep it available. To ensure that when the time was right, when the Caldwell family was ready, they could acquire it cleanly and find what had been left inside and extract it on their own terms. What he did not anticipate was Willa Ashby, who arrived before he was ready and bought the property for $15 and found the room before he could get inside. He let her buy it. That is what she now understands. He could have stopped the sale. He had the influence to do it, the relationship with every official in the county. He chose not to because he expected to acquire it from her afterward, once she had done the work of finding whatever was inside. She was meant to be useful and then dispensable. She refused to be dispensable, and now he is recalculating. She wraps the journal in its oilcloth and returns it to the kitchen larder. She banks the fire and lies down on her blanket with coal at her feet and works through the problem until sleep takes her. She realizes, very little time. The storm comes in the last week of November. She has felt it building for 2 days. The pressure changed the particular quality of the cloud cover, moving in from the northwest, the way the temperature dropped 15 degrees in an afternoon. She has done what she can, stacked her firewood inside, moved the most fragile of Adeline's jars to the highest kitchen shelf, checked every window she has sealed, and reinforced the weakest ones with additional strips of cloth pressed into the frames with the back of a kitchen knife. It is not enough. It is never enough with a storm like this one. It hits on a Tuesday night, and it hits with the uncomplicated fury of a Virginia storm that has been building across open country and has found at last a collection of old stone buildings to introduce itself to. The wind comes first, a sustained battering force that makes the house groan in its bones, the old timbers in the walls and attic flexing and settling with sounds like slow conversation. Then the rain, heavy and nearly horizontal, driving against every seam and gap and imperfection in the exterior. She can hear it finding the places she could not reach, the gaps she did not know existed. Water making its way through routes she has not yet mapped. She keeps the kitchen fire going and does not sleep. Around midnight, she hears it, a crack above her that is sharper and more decisive than the ordinary language of storm stress. Immediate. Final. It comes from the West Wing. She has known the West Wing was the weakest part of the house. She has documented it carefully. She has planned to address it in spring. Spring has not come. She takes her candle and goes to look. The west parlor ceiling has come down. Not all of it, a section perhaps 6 feet across, where a long compromise rafter has finally given up its negotiation with gravity and fallen inward, taking plaster and lath and a portion of the floor above with it. Rain is pouring through the opening in a steady torrent, spreading across the floor, running down the walls, soaking through the ancient plaster and the floorboards, and draining presumably to the cellar below. The destruction is significant. She stands in the doorway, looking at it, feeling the cold rain hit her face from across the room, and the despair that rises in her is genuine and deep, and she does not pretend otherwise. Weeks of work, weeks of effort and care, and the slow, patient accumulation of small victories. And the storm has unmade a portion of it in a single night with the casual, destructive efficiency of weather that does not know and would not care that it is destroying something a person has been tending. She does not go in. There is nothing to be done tonight that would not cost her her health. She backs away from the door, closes it, and returns to the kitchen. She is sitting beside the fire, coal pressed against her leg, listening to the storm do its work on her house, when she hears the sound that does not belong to it. Banging on the front door. Urgent, rhythmic, the sound of a fist that means it not testing the door, not tentative, the sound of someone who needs the door to open and is committed to making that happen. She takes her candle. The hall is cold and dark, the storm audible on every side. She goes to the door and works it open against the wind, leaning her weight into the effort. And the door gives and the wind comes in, and in the candlelight on the step is a woman. She is drenched, completely, entirely soaked, her dark coat plastered to her body, her hair down and streaming. She is holding something against her chest, a bundle wrapped in her coat's excess fabric held tight with both arms. And Willa can see, as the candlelight catches it, a small face inside the bundle. A child's face, eyes closed, brow furrowed with the discomfort of cold, a 5-year-old's face doing the work of weathering something beyond a 5-year-old's understanding of what it means to be this cold and this far from safety. "Please," the woman says, her voice is rough with cold barely carrying over the storm. "Our wagon, the axle broke in the lane. I saw your light. There is a child." Willa steps back, opens the door wider. "Come in," she says. "Come in now." The woman is Ruth. She tells Willa this when she has stopped shaking enough to form full sentences, sitting as close to the kitchen fire as she can get without touching it. The child, her son Edmund, 5 years old, wrapped in Willa's single blanket and beginning to recover his color, the furrowed brow slowly smoothing as warmth reaches him. She is traveling to her sister's household in the next county. She has been on the road since before the storm turned serious. The wagon axle snapped on the hill below Harrogate, and she saw the candlelight in the upstairs window and climbed toward it through the rain, holding Edmund against her body with both arms the entire way. They told us in town, Ruth says, her hands wrapped around the cup of hot water Willa has given her, the only hot thing she has to offer, that this house was cursed, that no one lived here. She looks around the kitchen at the clean hearth, the swept floor, the evidence of a person who has been working carefully and steadily at something. I almost didn't come up the lane. I'm glad you did, Willa says. She gives Ruth the last of the bread. She gives Edmund a small piece of the hard cheese she has been rationing for a week. She feeds Cole his portion last, and Cole accepts it with the dignity of an animal that has decided not to comment on the irregularity of the evening. Ruth and her son sleep by the fire on the blanket, and Willa sits up through the rest of the night in the wooden chair keeping the fire going, listening to the storm spend itself against the house. And in the hours before dawn, while Ruth and Edmund sleep, and the storm begins at last to moderate the wind, dropping first the rain following the sound of the house's protests. Gradually quieting, Willa sits with the full weight of what she knows and thinks through, carefully and completely what she must do next. She cannot stay silent. She has understood this for weeks, but tonight it becomes urgent in a way she can no longer defer. The work in that journal does not belong locked behind a brick wall in a sealed room on a hill that the county calls cursed. It did not belong there in Adeline Voss's time, and it does not belong there now, 35 years later, in a county where people still die of the same disease, in the same rented rooms, in the same February cold, with no doctor within their means to call. Where women like Ruth travel through November storms on broken-axled wagons with their children wrapped in their coats because they have no other way to get where they need to go. Her mother deserved better. Ruth, shivering on a roadside with Edmund held against her chest, deserved better. The people of Ashford County, whose names do not appear in the judicial record, and whose land no one covets, and whose deaths leave no contest in the courts, they deserve better. Adeline Voss saw to it that better was possible, and Harlan Caldwell buried it for 35 years because it stood between his family and a profit. The storm breaks toward dawn, leaving the world washed and very still under a sky that has spent all its anger and returned to the cold, pale blue of a November morning that intends to be clear. Willa watches the kitchen window lighten from black to gray to the pale washed white of a morning after hard rain. Ruth wakes and finds Willa in the chair and looks at her with the particular expression of someone who understands without being told that they are in the presence of a person who has spent the night deciding something important. You saved us, Ruth says quietly so as not to wake Edmund. You needed shelter, Willa says. That's what houses are for. Ruth goes into Ashford later that morning to find a wheelwright and a blacksmith for the wagon. And the story she carries with her of a warm kitchen and a shared fire, and a young woman who gave the last of her bread without hesitation and sat up all night to keep the fire going, is the first story told about Harrogate in 35 years that does not end with a warning. She tells it in every household she enters and to every person who asks, and the story moves through Ashford with the quiet, specific velocity of something that happens to be true. But Willa, moving through the damaged house in the gray morning light, cataloging what the storm has cost, and what remains, knows that a good story will not be enough. She wraps Adeline Voss's journal carefully in the oilcloth. She puts on her coat and her sturdiest boots. She has 12 miles to walk. The road to Millhaven is not kind in late November. It runs south from Ashford along the base of the first ridge through bottomland that the recent storm has turned into a long argument between mud and standing water. The creek crossings are swollen, two of them, running over the stepping stones entirely, and she wades through both with her boots in her hand and the oilcloth parcel held above her head, the cold water coming to her knees, the current pushing at her legs with a cheerful indifference to her plans. She puts her boots back on afterward and walks the rest of the way with wet feet and does not think about it. She has 12 miles to cover and a reason to cover them, and those two facts are enough. She walks through the morning and into the early afternoon when the sky begins to close down again, with the particular gray of a Virginia November that is not finished with the region yet. The town of Millhaven appears below her when she crests the last hill larger than Ashford, a proper market town with a courthouse and a mill and a main street long enough to have two different establishments selling dry goods. She stands at the top of the hill for a moment and catches her breath and looks down at it. Somewhere in that town is a woman named Cecily Marsh. Willa knows only what Dorothea Horn told her the second time they spoke. 3 days after the storm, she had gone to the churchyard to leave a small bundle of dried sage. On the grave, she had noticed the old woman tending a grave. She now understood that bore the name Voss on its stone, though the first name was worn to near illegibility. Dorothea had been there sitting on the low stone bench beside the gate with her black shawl pulled close and her dark eyes open to the cold morning, and she had looked at Willa with those eyes and said without preamble, "You found it." Not a question. A statement of fact delivered by someone who has been waiting for this conversation for a very long time. "Yes," Willa said. Dorothea nodded once, the nod of someone receiving a confirmation of something they already knew, because they have been keeping watch over it for 76 years and could feel in the way of people who have been keeping watch for that long that the moment of finding had finally arrived. "Then you need a lawyer who isn't Caldwell's," she said. "There's a woman in Millhaven, Cecily Marsh. She passed the bar examination in Richmond 12 years ago. First woman in the district to do it. Caldwell made sure she was never permitted to practice in Ashford County. He arranged it through the County Bar Association, called it a matter of professional conduct, but it was a lie, and everyone who was present at the time knew it was a lie, and no one said so." The old woman looked at Willa with the steady patience of someone who has watched power operate for a very long time. "She's been waiting for something she can actually win. I expect you have it." Willa had looked at the grave with the worn Voss stone. "You knew her," she said. "Adeline Voss." Dorothea was quiet for a moment. "I was 12 years old," she said, "when she came to treat my mother's fever. She sat with her for 3 nights. My mother lived." She looked at the stone. "I have been tending this grave for 76 years. I have been waiting for 76 years for someone to come up that lane and do what you have done." She looked at Willa. "Now go to Millhaven, and go quickly." That was all Dorothea said. It was enough. Cecily Marsh's office is on the second floor of a brick building on Millhaven's Main Street, above a printing shop whose mechanical smells, ink and hot metal and paper, rise pleasantly through the floorboards. The sign on the door is Modest C. Marsh, Attorney. By appointment. Willa does not have an appointment. She knocks anyway. The woman who opens the door is perhaps 40, spare and upright, in the manner of someone who has learned to take up exactly the space required, and not 1 inch more, because every inch beyond that will be contested, and she has spent 12 years in a county that contests every inch available to her. Her hair is brown going gray, pulled back practically. Her eyes are dark and quick and assess Willa in the first 3 seconds with the efficiency of a person who has learned to make accurate judgments fast because slow ones cost more than they can afford. She looks at Willa's worn coat and muddy boots. She looks at the oilcloth parcel under Willa's arm. She looks at Willa's face, at the particular quality of composure there, the composure that is not calm but its more durable cousin, the composure of someone who has decided something and is carrying that decision forward with both hands. "You've walked from Ashford," she says. "Yes. Come in." The office is spare and orderly. A desk with nothing on it that does not need to be there. Bookshelves, actually full law volumes, county records, reference materials, arranged with the system of someone who uses them regularly and cannot afford to waste time searching. A single client's chair, plain wood. One window overlooking the street, the November light coming through it, clean and flat. Cecily Marsh sits behind her desk and folds her hands and waits. Willa sits in the plain chair and tells her everything. She does not perform it. She does not arrange it for effect. She tells it the way she has told herself the story in the long hours of the preceding nights, in order with the facts placed carefully and the inferences distinguished from the facts, beginning with the notice board and the $15 and ending with the oilcloth parcel on her lap and 12 miles of November mud on her boots. Cecily Marsh does not interrupt. She does not write anything down. She sits with her hands folded and her dark eyes on Willa's face, and she listens with the absolute disciplined attention of someone who understands that the first telling of a story is the only unedited one, and therefore the most important. When Willa finishes, the office is quiet for a moment. The printing press in the floor below makes a rhythmic, mechanical sound that has been the background of the entire conversation without either of them remarking on it. Then Cecily Marsh says, "May I see the journal?" Willa sets it on the desk. Cecily opens it carefully, her hands adjusted for old paper, and reads. She reads the inscription on the inside cover. She reads several pages in the middle, tilting the journal toward the window light to see the faded ink. She reads the final section. She finds the draft letter to Aldous Caldwell and reads it twice, her expression giving nothing away. She closes the journal. She looks at Willa. "The question," she says, "is whether there is a will. Adeline Voss owned Harrogate outright. Her father built it and left it to her in 1848, and she had no siblings. The house should have passed through her estate when she died in 1862. What is documented is that no will was ever probated in Ashford County. The court recorded the property as intestate, and it passed into county administration, where it has sat on the tax rolls losing value for 35 years until the court ordered it sold." She pauses. What is not documented, what has never been explained, is what happened to Adeline Voss's estate papers. A woman of her standing with property and a professional practice, and the kind of deliberate, organized mind apparent on every page of that journal would have had a will. It did not appear. It was either never made, which I do not believe, or it was suppressed. She wrote that the record would survive, Willa says. She said she had seen to it, but the journal was the only thing in the room. Cecily Marsh looks at the journal. She looks at the desk in front of her. She looks at the window in the street below it. And then she looks at Willa with an expression that is the first departure from professional neutrality she has shown in the entire conversation. Something that is not quite excitement, because excitement implies uncertainty, and what is on her face is more settled than that. It is the expression of someone who has just understood the shape of a thing. They have been looking for a shape that has been in the periphery of their vision for years, resolving now into something clear. The Millhaven County Clerk, she says, maintains the records for 4 surrounding counties when Ashford's records are in dispute or under appeal. It is an arrangement that dates from the 1840s, when the Ashford Courthouse had a fire. Documents filed with the Millhaven Clerk's office during that period are still held here. She stands. "I need to go to the clerk's office. I need you to wait here." She puts on her coat and picks up a leather satchel. She pauses at the door. "Miss Ashby, how long have you been in Ashford?" "Since October," Willa says. "And in that time, has Judge Caldwell been to the property?" "Once. He offered me $300. Cecily Marsh's expression does not change, but something behind it shifts. "He has known for some time that the property contains something he wants. He let you buy it because he expected to acquire it from you once you had done the work of finding it. When you refused to sell, he moved to legal action." She opens the door. "He will move faster now. So will I." She leaves. Willa sits in the plain wooden chair in the quiet office and listens to the printing press below and waits. She waits for 2 hours. She does not pace. She sits with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the window, and she thinks through every possible outcome of the next hours and days and weeks. With the methodical patience she has applied to every problem since she was old enough to understand that panic is a form of surrender, and she cannot afford the things it costs. She has come this far by not surrendering. She does not intend to begin now. When Cecily Marsh comes back through the door, she is carrying her leather satchel with both hands, the way a person carries something they do not want to drop, and are very aware of what it would mean to drop it. She sets it on the desk. She opens it. She removes a document, several pages folded together, the paper old and brown at the edges in the way of paper that has been stored carefully for a long time. Without being disturbed, the ink faded but legible. She sets it on the desk beside Adeline Voss's journal, and the two objects sit there together in the gray afternoon light, 35 years of distance between them, finally in the same room. Filed with the Millhaven County Clerk on the 14th of January, 1862, Cecily Marsh says. Her voice is measured and precise and carries beneath its precision a quality Willa has not heard in it before. Something barely contains something that has been waiting a long time to have somewhere to go. 6 weeks before Adeline Voss died. Witnessed by a Millhaven notary whose records confirm the filing date. It has been here the entire time in the county archive, correctly filed and never disturbed, because no one in Ashford County who knew it existed had any interest in finding it, and no one in Millhaven knew it mattered. Willa looks at the document. She can read the heading from where she sits. Last Will and Testament of Dr. Adeline Elspeth Voss of Harrogate, Ashford County, Virginia. She filed it here, Willa says, understanding arriving not as a surprise but as the final piece of a shape she has been tracing for weeks. The shape of a mind she has been reading in candlelight in a sealed room. The shape of a woman who understood her situation exactly and prepared for every foreseeable consequence of it. She knew she couldn't trust the Ashford clerk. She knew what Aldous Caldwell was capable of. So she came to Millhaven and filed it here where his reach didn't extend 6 weeks before she died. 6 weeks, Cecily Marsh says, which suggests she knew she was in danger, which suggests the fall down the staircase was not the accident the Ashford coroner recorded it as. She sits down. She opens the will to the relevant passage. The bequest reads as follows. She clears her throat and reads aloud, and her voice in the quiet office gives the old words the weight they were always meant to carry. To whosoever has the patience to find what I have hidden within the walls of Harrogate, and the character and the will to steward it for the good of all persons who suffer to that person, I leave the property known as Harrogate in its entirety, with all its contents and all rights pertaining to the medical research contained therein. This bequest supersedes all other claims. The work is the inheritance. The person who finds it has already proven themselves worthy of it. The office is very quiet. The printing press has stopped. Willa looks at the will. She looks at Cecily Marsh. The deed of sale from Silas Pruitt, Cecily Marsh says carefully, conveys the county's interest in the property. But the county's interest was always subordinate to the terms of a valid will, which the county did not know existed because it was never disclosed to them. This will is valid. It is witnessed, notarized, and correctly filed. Your ownership of Harrogate is not established by the $15 you paid Pruitt, though that transaction is itself legitimate. Your ownership is established by this document written by Adeline Voss 35 years ago in anticipation of exactly this moment. She pauses. Caldwell's lawsuit has no standing. He is attempting to challenge a deed of sale when the prior instrument, the will, was never properly administered. When this document is presented to the court, his case collapses. Willa is quiet for a moment, assembling the next question carefully. He will know that, she says. Yes. What will he do? And Cecily Marsh considers the question with the honesty it deserves, the honesty of someone who has spent 12 years understanding exactly how this particular man operates. He will do what powerful men do when the law moves against them and they have resources and time. He will delay. He will find procedural objections. He will attempt to have the will's validity challenged on technical grounds, the age of the document, the notary's records, the witnesses. He will make the process as expensive and exhausting as possible because he has money and time, and you have neither. She folds her hands on the desk, which is why we cannot fight this in the Ashford County Courthouse, where he has 30 years of relationships with every judge and clerk and bailiff. We need to put this before the community first, before the people of Ashford County who have a stake in what this will contains. She looks at the journal, the medical research, the treatment, the people who lost someone to lung fever while this was sealed in a wall. Those people are not abstractions. They are voters. They are the judge's neighbors, and they have been lied to for 35 years. Willa thinks of Ruth shivering on a November doorstep with Edmund wrapped in her coat. She thinks of her mother in February in a rented room above a laundry. She thinks of the churchyard in Ashford, the stones close together, the dates that say everything without saying anything, the specific grammar of a community that has lost too many people too young and called it God's will because there was nothing else to call it. The church, she says, not the courthouse, the Baptist church at the end of the main street. The pastor owes Caldwell nothing. I've watched them together in town, and there's nothing between them but formal courtesy and the kind of mutual distance that suggests an old disagreement that was never resolved. Cecily Marsh looks at her for a moment, the look of someone encountering a piece of information that requires them to adjust their picture of the person in front of them. The Baptist Church, she says. Yes, I'll write to Pastor Good today. The meeting is set for the second Saturday of December. The 2 weeks between are the longest of Willa's life, and also in certain ways the most ordinary. She goes back to Harrogate and keeps working. There is nothing else to do with the waiting, and the house still needs tending. She patches what she can of the storm damage in the west parlor. She reinforces the worst of the roof gaps with slates she pries carefully from a collapsed outbuilding. She works in the kitchen garden in the cold mornings, turning compost into the beds, preparing them for a spring that now seems for the first time like a real possibility rather than a theoretical one. Cole follows her from room to room with his usual air of supervisory authority and spends his evenings pressed against her side when she sits by the kitchen fire, reading Adeline Voss's journal for what she has lost count of as the number of times. She knows it nearly by heart now. She knows the rhythm of the clinical observations and the precise language of the botanical notes and the slightly different quality of the handwriting in the later pages where the mind behind it was writing under pressure, aware of time running out. She is not afraid. She examines herself for fear and finds something more interesting in its place, a settled, specific readiness. The kind that comes not from certainty of outcome, but from clarity of purpose. She knows what she has. She knows what it means. She knows who has been harmed by its suppression. She does not know how the meeting will go, and she has stopped trying to predict it because the meeting will be what the meeting will be, and her job is to tell the truth as clearly as she can and let the truth do its work. She practices in the empty rooms. She stands in the library where the hidden room sits behind its loose bricks, and Adeline Voss's jars of botanical material wait on the kitchen shelves, and she speaks aloud into the dust in the cold air, finding the right words for what she needs to say. She is not a trained speaker. She is not comfortable with attention. But she has an asset that no training produces. She is telling the truth, and the truth told plainly has a sound that an audience recognizes before their mind has finished processing the words. 2 days before the meeting, Silas Pruitt comes up the lane. He comes alone on foot, which itself is a kind of statement about how he has decided to position himself relative to what is about to happen. He knocks on the front door, the first person who has ever knocked properly, as if the house is an ordinary house with an ordinary resident, and when Willa opens it, he takes off his hat and holds it in both hands with the manner of a man who has come to say something he has been working up to for some time. I know about the meeting, he says. His voice has a different quality than it had in his office in October. The dry efficiency is still there, but something else has been added to it, something that takes her a moment to identify, and then she does discomfort. The particular discomfort of a person who has done something they cannot entirely justify to themselves and has finally decided to do something about that. I want you to know what was done with the Harrogate estate, the suppression of the will, the stories about the curse. I was not part of it. It happened before my time in this county, but I have known for some years that the legal history of that property was irregular, and I did not pursue the irregularity. I told myself there was nothing actionable, That was a failure of my professional duty, and I am aware of it. Willa looks at him. He is not a bad man. She understood that in his office in October when he pushed her mother's bracelet back across the desk. He is a careful man, a man who has survived in Ashford County by being useful to the powerful without actively participating in their projects. It is not heroism. It is not villainy. It is a very human kind of compromise, the kind that feels like survival when you are in the middle of it and looks like complicity when you see it from the outside. Will you come to the meeting? She asks. He nods once. I'll bring the deed of sale and my documentation of Caldwell's lawsuit, which I believe the community should see in full. He pauses. For what it's worth, Miss Ashby, I think what you've done here is remarkable. What I've done is clean a house and read a journal, she says. Dr. Voss is the one who did something remarkable. He puts his hat back on and walks back down the lane, and Willa watches him go and thinks that whatever comes next, she is not entirely without allies. It is a different feeling than she has had for most of her 18 years, and she allows herself for a single moment in the cold December afternoon to feel the unfamiliar texture of it. The Baptist Church of Ashford fills on the second Saturday of December to a capacity that Pastor Good in 30 years of ministry says afterward he has never seen on any occasion short of Christmas and Easter together. They come because the story has moved through the county in the way of stories that carry genuine weight, not as gossip which travels loudly and loses detail with each retelling, but as news which travels more quietly and arrives with its substance largely intact. Ruth, whose wagon axle was repaired by the Ashford blacksmith and who reached her sister's household without further incident, has told her story in every household she has visited since November. The warm kitchen, the shared fire, the girl who gave the last of her bread. Dorothea Horn has told hers to everyone who sits near her at church, and she says it plainly and without embellishment, the way she has said true things her entire life. And Silas Pruitt, it turns out, has told his carefully and precisely to two other attorneys in the county, both of whom have driven from considerable distances to be present today. They fill the pews from the front. They stand along the walls. Several men stand in the vestibule with the door open, cold air flowing in around them because there is no more room inside, and they are not willing to leave. Willa counts faces without meaning to farm families she has seen in town. The shopkeeper from the general store, the blacksmith, the baker, and his wife who began leaving fresh loaves at the bottom of the Harrogate Lane after Ruth told her story. The school teacher with three of her older students beside her. The pastor who has arranged the front of the sanctuary with a small table at which Willa now stands. And there in the front left pew, Judge Harlan Caldwell. He has come. She did not know if he would. He has brought no one with him. Deputy Crane is not present, which tells her something about how Caldwell has read the situation and what he has calculated his best available posture to be. He sits with his coat buttoned and his expression arranged in the careful neutral of a man who is attending an event he intends to survive through the exercise of patience and the strategic deployment of procedural objections. He does not look at Willa when she walks to the front of the church. She sets Adeline Voss's journal and the will on the small table. She sets beside them Cecily Marsh's legal summary, a document of 4 pages that lays out with the numbered precision of a legal brief the chain of events from 1862 to the present. Cecily Marsh stands to Willa's left. Silas Pruitt sits in the front right pew with his files on his knees, his hat on the pew beside him. Pastor Good sits to the side, his hands folded, his expression grave and entirely attentive. Willa looks out at the room, 200 faces. She begins. She does not speak loudly. She does not need to. The church is well built, and the room is absolutely quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when everyone in them has decided to listen, and her voice, which has always been lower and steadier than her age suggests, carries to every wall without effort. She tells it simply. The notice board, the $15, Pruitt and Caldwell in the office, and Caldwell's laughter, which several people in the pews heard about at the time and remember. The lane to Harrogate choked with 35 years of overgrowth. The first night, coal in the bread, the draft in the library, the rent on the mantle. She tells it without embellishment, and the room is so quiet that when she describes the sound of the pry bar working the first brick loose, two people in the middle pews visibly hold their breath. She describes the room. She describes the journal. She opens it and reads, not the botanical notes, not the clinical records. She reads the inscription on the inside cover in Adeline Voss's own handwriting. This record is the whole of 22 years of clinical practice and botanical research. It is left here in trust for whoever has the patience and the will to find it. May it be used for the good it was always meant for. She reads the draft letter to Aldous Caldwell, the refusal, the principle it articulates. This treatment belongs to everyone who is suffering. She does not look at Harlan Caldwell while she reads it. She does not need to. When she finishes reading, she sets the journal down. She says the woman who wrote this died 6 weeks after she filed her will in Millhaven. She died in an accident that no one witnessed in a house that was sealed immediately after and surrounded within months by stories that were designed to make sure no one ever went back inside. She lets that sit for a moment in the quiet. Those stories worked for 35 years. They are why the property was still on the county tax rolls in October. They are why no one in Ashford knew what was inside that house. And they are why the lawsuit that Judge Caldwell filed against my ownership last month has no legal basis, because the will that establishes my right to Harrogate has been sitting in the Millhaven County Archive since January of 1862. Correctly filed, never disturbed, simply never disclosed to the people whose county it is. She steps back. Cecily Marsh steps forward and presents the legal case with the calm, methodical precision of someone who has been waiting 12 years for a room this attentive. She presents the will. She presents the Millhaven filing record. She presents Pruitt's documentation of Caldwell's lawsuit. She explains in terms that require no legal education to follow exactly what the suppression of Adeline Voss's will means, what it costs the county in medical knowledge, and what it costs the families whose names appear in the churchyard outside. Then she reads the names. She has researched them in the county death records over the previous 2 weeks, working through the ledgers with the focused patience of someone who understands that this list is not a bureaucratic exercise, but an accounting. 47 deaths from lung fever in Ashford County between 1862 and 1897. 47 names read aloud in the Baptist church on a December morning in a room full of people who recognize a significant number of them. A grandmother, a husband, 3 children in the same family one winter, 1879. 3 stones in a row in the churchyard that anyone in this room can picture because they have walked past them every Sunday for years. A young woman, 23, who died the February before last. A boy of 9. A farmer whose wife sat in this church every week for 30 years afterward and never spoke of it because some losses do not have the right words. The room does not make a sound while she reads. When she finishes, the silence holds for a moment that is longer than silence usually holds in a room of 200 people, a moment in which 200 people are arriving each alone and all together at the same understanding. Then someone in the back, a woman in a gray coat, middle-aged, who has been very still throughout, makes a sound that is not quite crying, but is in the same territory, and the sound moves through the room like a wave moving through water, not loud but unmistakable. The sound of a community absorbing something it cannot unabsorb. Harlan Caldwell stands. The room goes quieter, if that is possible. A different quality of quiet. The quiet of people bracing. He stands with his coat buttoned and his hands at his sides, and he looks not at Willa but at some point in the middle distance, as if addressing the air between himself and the altar. He opens his mouth. He closes it. He opens it again. The matter of the will, he says, and his voice has lost the large room-filling quality it carries in ordinary circumstances. It is thinner now, and she can hear the effort behind it. Is a legal question to be settled in the appropriate. The will is valid, Judge Caldwell. Cecily Marsh's voice is not raised. It does not need to be raised to be the most authoritative voice in the room. The filing date is documented. The notarization is documented. The bequest is clear. There is no legal proceeding available to you that will change those facts. The circuit court in Millhaven will confirm this, and I believe you know it. Among the documents Cecily Marsh then presents, spreading them on the table with the deliberate care of someone who has prepared each exhibit and knows exactly what each one contains, is a partial inventory of materials removed from Harrogate during the November storm. Items recovered from Caldwell's office under the Millhaven Circuit Court's discovery order recovered in Deputy Crane's own handwriting from records seized 3 days prior. The missing pages from Adeline's botanical maps. The partial formulary that had been taken from the hidden room while Ruth and Edmund slept by the fire and Willa sat watch. All of it recovered. All of it returned. All of it now documented as evidence of what the Caldwell family had been willing to do to keep this room sealed. The court document sits on the table beside the will in the journal. 3 objects that together tell the complete story from 1861 to the present moment. He looks at Cecily Marsh. He looks at Willa. He looks at the room. 200 faces look back at him. Not with anger, or not only with anger, with something heavier than anger and more durable. The specific weight of a community that has understood something and cannot ununderstand it. People who have buried their dead and grieved their losses and accepted the explanation the world offered them, which was that these things happen, that illness is arbitrary, that some people are taken early and there is no accounting for it, and who have now been told that there was an accounting for it, that someone with the knowledge to change the outcome chose profit over the attempt, and that the choice was made by a man who has been sitting at the head of their county's affairs for decades. Caldwell buttons his coat, which is already buttoned, the gesture of a man whose hands need something to do. He picks up his hat from the pew beside him. He walks to the side door of the church, not the front, not back through the assembled community, the side door which Pastor Good uses on ordinary Sundays to slip in and out quietly. He opens it. He goes through it. The door closes behind him with a sound that is very ordinary, a latch clicking into place, the most mundane sound in the world. The room listens to his footsteps on the frozen ground outside growing smaller. Then the room breathes. The legal proceedings that follow are, as Cecily Marsh predicted, not simple. Caldwell does not relinquish quietly. No one who has held power that long ever does. And the record of his efforts in the months after December fills 3 folders in Cecily Marsh's office and occupies a significant portion of her working hours. He files 2 separate procedural challenges to the will's validity, both of which the Millhaven Circuit Court dismisses within the month. He argues that the deed of sale to Willa supersedes the prior instrument, which Cecily Marsh dispatches in a written response of 6 pages that the circuit judge describes in his ruling as comprehensive. He attempts in January to have the Harrogate property reclassified as a county historical site, which would have effectively frozen its ownership in legal ambiguity for years. And this attempt fails when Silas Pruitt, who has by this point committed himself fully to a different kind of professional conduct than he has practiced for most of his career, produces 3 precedents from Virginia case law that make the reclassification impossible under the existing statutes. By February, the challenges have exhausted themselves. Willa's ownership of Harrogate is confirmed in the Millhaven Circuit Court on a Tuesday morning in early February 1898. In a brief formal proceeding that Cecily Marsh describes afterward as one of the most straightforward cases she has handled in 12 years of practice, the legal clarity of it having been established so thoroughly in the preceding months that the hearing itself is less a battle than a formality. Willa is in the kitchen garden when Cecily rides up the lane with the certified copy of the court order. The late winter sun is thin and direct, the kind of February sun that does not warm but illuminates everything with a clarity that has been absent since October. And the kitchen garden in that light looks more like itself than it has since Willa arrived. The beds clear, the paths visible, the stone border solid. She comes out to the gate and Cecily hands her the document over the stone wall, and they stand on opposite sides of it for a moment, the lawyer on her horse, the 19-year-old in her working clothes with February soil on her hands, and look at each other. "It's done," Cecily Marsh says. Willa looks at the document, at the court seal, at the language she has read before in draft, now formal and final and real. The language that says in the precise and terrible vocabulary of the law that this is hers, that this has always been hers, that the woman who placed a journal on a desk in a sealed room in 1862 always intended it to be hers, whoever she turned out to be. Thank you, she says. Don't thank me, Cecily says, and there is something in her voice that Willa has not heard there before. Something warm, in particular the voice of a person speaking to someone they have come to regard in a way that exceeds the professional. I spent 12 years waiting for a case worth bringing. You walked 12 miles in November mud and brought it to me. She gathers her reins. What will you do now? Willa looks at the house, the stone facade gray-green in the February morning, the front porch solid on its columns, the cupola at the top, the cobalt glass dull in the winter light, but whole, every pane intact, the inscription running around its interior that she has read 100 times now, for she who tends what others abandon. In the kitchen garden behind her, she can smell the turned earth of the beds she has prepared for spring, the iron and potential smell of soil that has been given attention and is ready to receive what comes next. Plant the garden, she says. Start with the simples. Adeline's records are specific enough about the growing conditions. I think the south wall beds will be right for the bergamot and the spice bush. The black cohosh needs the shade of the north wall, and the boneset wants the east border where the drainage is best. She pauses. And right to the University of Virginia, the medical faculty. The research needs people with proper training to verify it and continue it. I can tend the garden and I can protect the record, but I can't finish the science. That needs someone who can. Cecily Marsh looks at her for a moment with an expression that Willa has no name for, something between admiration and something older than admiration, the look of a person who has seen a rare thing done simply and is still absorbing what that means. You are 18 years old, she says. 19, Willa says. In September. Right, says Cecily Marsh and rides back down the lane. Spring comes to Harrogate the way spring always comes to the Virginia Piedmont. Not all at once, but in argument with the departing winter, advancing and retreating until one morning in late March, when the air tips decisively from cold to cool and stays there and the ground releases its held moisture, and the sugar maples along the road go from bare gray to the first fragile green of new leaf. The community of Ashford does not transform overnight. Communities do not work that way, and Willa does not expect it to and does not need it to. But it changes in the particular way of a place that has had a long-held story replaced by a true one, and is working out household by household, conversation by conversation, what the new story means for how they understand themselves and what they owe to each other. The baker's wife begins leaving a fresh loaf at the bottom of the Harrogate Lane every Tuesday morning, without being asked and without attaching any message to it, the offering sufficient in itself. The school teacher brings her students up the hill one afternoon in April for what she calls a lesson in local history, and Willa shows them the library and the garden, and carefully with the oilcloth parcel held open for them to look but not touch Adeline Voss's journal. She watches 12 children look at a dead woman's handwriting with something approaching awe, and she thinks of Adeline filing her will in Millhaven in January of 1862, trusting that someone would eventually come trusting the future with the most complete gift she could offer it. The men from the village come in groups of 2 and 3 on Saturday mornings with tools and no stated agenda, and they repair things. Not because anyone organized it or asked them to, but because the meeting in December established something that belongs to all of them, and the house on the hill belongs to that something now, and belonging generates its own kind of obligation. The west parlor ceiling is rebuilt over 2 weekends by 4 men who work without much conversation, but with considerable competence. The worst of the lane's ruts are filled with gravel donated from the quarry at the edge of town. The iron gates at the bottom of the property are freed from their rust with wire brushes and oil, and rehung on their posts and oiled until they swing without sound, and someone has painted them, though no one claims credit for this. Dorothea Horn comes to sit in the kitchen garden on warm afternoons, a blanket over her knees, watching Willa work the beds with the patience of a woman who has been watching this garden in her mind for 76 years, and is now watching it in fact. She does not offer much commentary. She does not need to. Her presence is its own form of communication, the presence of a person who has waited a very long time for something to resolve itself and is enjoying in her 89th year the resolution. One afternoon in May, when the bergamot is showing its first real growth along the south wall, and the black cohosh has taken hold in the north border with a vigor that Adeline Voss would have recognized from her own notes, Dorothea says without looking up from her knitting, "I knew her, you know, Adeline Voss. I was 12 years old when she came to treat my mother's fever. She sat with her for 3 nights." She is quiet for a moment. The needles continue their small rhythmic sound. She was not a large woman. She was not loud. But when she walked into a room, the room knew it. The air changed. You could feel it. She looks at Willa working the soil along the south border with the careful attention she gives to everything. You would have liked each other. Willa does not answer immediately. She works the soil around a bergamot plant, pressing it gently, firmly, the way you settle something into its place without forcing it, and considers the idea. A woman 35 years dead and a girl not yet 19 in the conversation they might have had. What they would have recognized in each other. What they would have argued about. What they would have worked on together side by side in this garden, in this house that was always meant to hold that kind of work. "I think I already know her," she says. "I've read everything she ever wrote." Dorothea Horn nods as if this is exactly the right answer and returns to her knitting. The letter from the University of Virginia arrives in June, written in a hand that Willa can tell even from the handwriting alone belongs to a person of considerable academic formality and genuine excitement, trying to coexist in the same correspondence. The formality winning on the surface, the excitement leaking through in the unusual density of the underlining and the number of sentences that begin with the word extraordinary. The faculty of the medical school has reviewed the photographic copies she sent of the most critical pages of Adeline Voss's journal, Cecily Marsh, arranged for a photographer in Millhaven to make the copies a process that took 2 days and produced images of a quality that surprised them both. And they wish to send 2 researchers to Harrogate to examine the original documents in the garden and whatever of Adeline's botanical preparations can be assessed. The letter uses words like unprecedented, insignificant, and extraordinary clinical methodology with the careful restraint of academics who know that superlatives are professionally dangerous and cannot quite help themselves regardless. She writes back and tells them to come in July, when the garden will be at its best and the first plantings will be well enough established to assess. They come a man named Dr. Ellison and a woman named Dr. Fay, both younger than she expected, both so absorbed in the journal within the first hour of their arrival that they forget entirely to eat the lunch she has prepared for them. She lets them work undisturbed in the library, the hidden room's wall now open properly, the bricks stacked neatly to the side, the room itself aired and lit, and finally, after 35 years, serving the purpose it was built for. Their voices reach her occasionally through the open library window, as she works the garden, the low, focused tones of 2 people working through something together. The occasional brief silence followed by a longer one, the sounds of minds engaged. She works in the garden while they work inside, and in the late afternoon she carries tea out to the front porch, and they come down from the library, and all 3 of them sit on the stone steps in the July sun and talk about Adeline Voss's methodology and what it means and what the path forward looks like. Dr. Fay, who studies botanical pharmacology and has the focused intensity of someone who has spent a career looking for exactly this kind of document without quite believing it existed, looks out over the garden with an expression that Willa recognizes because she has felt it herself, the expression of someone confronting something they have been looking for without knowing the exact shape of it and finding that the shape is precisely right. She was right, Dr. Fay says, about the compounds, about the mechanism. The clinical records are, I've never seen anything like them for this period. The rigor is extraordinary. She looks at Willa directly. Do you understand what this means for treatment research? For the people in these communities who still lose someone to this disease every winter? Yes, Willa says quietly. I understand exactly what it means. Dr. Fay looks at her for a moment with the particular attention of someone recalibrating what they are seeing. How old are you, she asks. 18, Willa says. 19 in September. Dr. Fay looks back out at the garden at the bergamot, in the sage and the black cohosh growing in their proper places along the proper walls. Each one where Adeline Voss's notes said it should go, each one, thriving in the soil and the light that Adeline Voss mapped 20 years before Willa was born. She shakes her head very slightly in a way that might mean many things and says nothing more for a long moment. On an evening in late July, when the garden is full of the long blue light of a Virginia summer, and the fireflies are beginning in the grass at the edge of the kitchen garden, rising and falling in their slow, patient light, Willa stands on the front steps of Harrogate and looks down at the town of Ashford below. Cole sits beside her groom now to the sleekness of an animal that has been eating reliably for 9 months and has made peace with being occasionally admired. He looks down at the town with the particular expression of a cat who has made his judgments about the world and found them satisfactory and does not intend to revisit them. The Cartwright, whose 2 sons have steady work now helping with the ongoing restoration of the house, and whose youngest daughter has developed the habit of bringing wildflowers to press in the pages of her school book, is coming up the lane with the daughter beside him. He sees Willa on the steps and raises his hat. "Evening, Miss Ashby. Fine night." "It is," she says. He continues through the gate to the kitchen garden, where his daughter immediately goes to the south wall to examine the bergamot, with the focused attention of a child who has been told several times that this garden matters and has decided to find out for herself what that means. Willa watches them. She thinks about $15, which is what it cost to buy this house, and she thinks about what the house contained, and she thinks about the distance between those two facts, the gap between what a thing appears to be worth and what it actually holds, between what the world decides to value and what turns out to matter. She thinks about Adeline Voss sitting in the hidden room for 22 years, measuring and recording and refusing with absolute consistency to let the work be privatized out of reach of the people who needed it. She thinks about the will filed in Millhaven in January of 1862, the deliberate patience of a woman who was not certain she would be alive to see it executed, but trusted that someone someday would find it and understand what it was and know what to do with it. She thinks about Cole finding her in the kitchen on the first night, stepping out of the shadows into the firelight and accepting the bread with the dignity of an animal that has already decided what kind of arrangement this is going to be. She thinks about her mother's hands, which were always warm and which worked very hard for very little and which deserved more than what they got. She goes back inside. She goes to the library. The bricks are stacked neatly beside the open doorway of the hidden room. She has decided not to reseal it, not ever, because rooms that have been hidden are not improved by being hidden again. She steps through the opening and lights the oil lamp she has placed on Adeline's desk, a proper lamp now steady and clear, adequate for reading and working and whatever comes next. She sits in the straight-back chair that Adeline Voss sat in for 22 years, and she opens the journal to the page she has read more times than any other, the last page of text before the back cover, the page where Adeline made her final addition before she left this room or was taken from it. Whatever he does next, the record will survive. I have seen to it. She runs her finger along the line, not quite touching the old ink, following the shapes of the letters, with the tip of her finger, the way you trace a path on a map to understand where it goes. She thinks of all the ways it survived. The dry air in the sealed room created by the chimney mast that Adeline understood would protect her work better than any vault. The intact bricks set with such care that they held for 35 years without mortar. The will filed in a different county with a different clerk in a notary whose records were impeccable. Dorothea Horn, 12 years old, watching a woman she trusted with the complete attention of a child who understands that what she is witnessing is important, and deciding to keep watching and deciding it again every year for 76 years, until the right person came up the lane with $15 and a vow made in the mud of a country road. The record survived because Adeline built its survival into the structure of the thing itself. Not just the hidden room, but the will in Millhaven, and the wren on the mantle, and the inscription in the cupola glass. A layered, patient architecture of preservation built by a woman who understood that the most powerful thing she could do for the future was to trust it completely, to act as if the future would send someone worth trusting, to make the work findable by anyone with the patience and the character to find it. Willa closes the journal. She goes upstairs to the top of the house, up the narrow stairs that lead to the cupola room, the small octagonal space she has cleaned and fitted with a chair and a small table, the room she comes to in the evenings when she wants to think without interruption. The cobalt glass panels surround her on all 8 sides, and in the last light of the July evening the room is full of a blue that is not quite like any other blue she has seen anywhere else, deeper than sky, steadier than water, the blue of something that was made to last and has been lasting and intends to go on lasting long after everyone currently alive has done whatever they are going to do and passed on. She sits below her Ashford, the church tower leaning slightly left as it always has. The main street, the last few figures of the evening, still moving along it in the long summer dusk. The farms beyond the town, the fields catching the last of the light, in the way that fields do in July when everything is full and green, and the work of the season has been done, and the light falls on it all with the particular satisfaction of a summer evening that knows what it contains. And somewhere in those fields she knows, in the soil of 4 separate farms that agreed in the spring to trial plantings of Adeline Voss's botanical preparations, not yet the complete treatment, not yet verified by the university researchers to the standard that will allow it to be formally published. But the beginning of that process, the first careful documented steps back toward what was always meant to happen. The work is continuing. The work that Adeline Voss spent 22 years building and 35 years waiting to be found is continuing, carried forward by people Adeline never met and could not have imagined into a future she did not live to see. She did not do this alone. She is clear about that, has been clear about it since the night in the kitchen when Ruth and Edmund slept by the fire and she sat up until dawn working through what she knew and what needed to happen next. The will existed before she was born. Dorothea Horn held the knowledge of it for decades and tended the grave above the town and waited for the right person to come up the lane. Cecily Marsh spent 12 years building the legal competence to prosecute a case like this, waiting in Millhaven for something she could actually win. Silas Pruitt in the end chose correctly and chose it publicly, which cost him something. Ruth, shivering on a November doorstep with her child against her chest, told the story that changed the town's picture of the house before the legal proceedings even began. She was the one who walked through the gap in the crumbling wall on a cold October afternoon with $15 in a canvas bag and a vow made in the mud of a country road. She was the one who listened to the stones. But the stones had been speaking for a very long time to anyone with the patience to hear them. The sun goes below the ridge. The cobalt glass goes from blue to a deeper blue to the first darkness, and then slowly as the moon rises behind the eastern hills, climbing above the tree line, with a deliberate patience of something that has been rising every night for longer than any of this has existed, and will continue rising long after the glass begins to do what it has always done. It glows, not brightly, not dramatically, not the way a fire glows or a lamp glows, with the restless energy of something consuming itself to make light. The way a kept promise glows, the way a thing placed deliberately in the world with care and intention, in the full weight of a person's understanding of what they are doing, and why the way that kind of thing glows when it has been waiting for the right conditions, and those conditions have finally arrived. Steady, patient, certain of itself. Cole appears in the doorway of the cupola room because Cole always appears wherever she is, having made his decision on the first night in October and not found any reason to revisit it in the months since. He looks at the glowing glass with the expression of an animal that has seen this before and has decided it is acceptable. He looks at her. He settles himself on the floor beside the chair, tucks his paws beneath him with the precise, satisfied motion of an animal that has chosen its position carefully and is done with the choosing, and closes his green eyes with the absolute satisfaction of a creature that lives somewhere. It has chosen with someone It has chosen in a house that has finally become what it was always meant to be. Willa leans back in the chair. Outside, the fireflies are thick in the meadow grass below the hill, rising and falling in their slow-speaking light, the same light they have been making in this field for every summer of the 35 years. This house stood empty and will make for every summer to come. The blue lantern glows above the town of Ashford, as it has always glowed as Adeline Voss designed it to glow, not as a warning, and not as a mystery, and not as a haunting, but as a signal. Patient and clear and intended from the very beginning to be answered. Someone answered it, and the answer, it turned out, was everything.